one person from his ummah by the name of Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. He was pelted and whipped, great scholar, great saint, and I will highlight the quality of rahmah and forgiveness in adversity. He was whipped to a point where a person came to the Mu'tasim and he said to Mu'tasim, he says, you know what, I have a track record that whoever I whip 10 times, before my 10th lash he dies. So Mu'tasim said, listen, you whip him and he dies, good, but if he remains alive, I'll free him. And at that time Ahmad bin Hanbal was past his 60s. He whips him 10 times, he doesn't die, and then he's sent back to his house. One of his students, he comes to visit Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah at his house. He sees Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah on the floor grabbing a pillow in pain. He says, Kayfa anta ya Imam? How are you feeling, O Imam? And Ahmad bin Hanbal says, you know, those whips and those marks on my back were not a big deal, but the pain that I'm feeling because of this open wound on my lower back is 10 times more than the pain I felt when I got whipped, and I cannot move. And that student says, oh Imam, just give me a few moments, let me go find out what's the best way of remedy. So he goes back into the prison, and the long story short, he finds out that this is an open wound, and the person in prison told him that this will infect his heart and he will die within 3 days if it's not treated. He said, how should you treat this? He said, you have to burn the wound. So he comes back to the house and he says to Imam, he said, oh Imam, I know how to treat this wound, but it's going to be very painful. He says, okay, I need this wound to be treated. He says, I have to burn this wound. He said, no problem. So Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal gets 2 pillows. He grabs onto one and he puts his knees onto one. And he bends over like this on the ground like this. And he says, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah ala ni'ma wa salama, Alhamdulillah ala iman. And he's just praising Allah, praising Allah. And finally, that there was no anesthesiologist in those days where you could put you to sleep and you can go have this operation in your sleep. No such thing. So he takes his metal and he burns the wound of Ahmad bin Hanbal, and he is going through pain. And the student says all throughout this process, this surgical procedure, he's making a dua. And the entire time he's repeating the same exact dua. After the whole procedure is finished and we covered him up and he got some rest, I asked him afterwards, I said, Imam, you could have made dua for anything. You could have made 15 different du'as. You made one du'a and you repeated it over and over and over again. And why did you make that du'a? Brothers and sisters in Islam, you know what du'a he was making? His du'a while he was going through that procedure was, Allahumma ghfir lil mu'tasim. Oh Allah, forgive Mu'tasim. The same person who put him through all those difficulties. Oh Allah, forgive Mu'tasim. Oh Allah, forgive him, forgive him. And the entire time he's going through this procedure, he's just saying, Allahumma ghfir lil mu'tasim, Allahumma ghfir lil mu'tasim. And the student is beyond himself. He says, why did you make dua for him for? You should have just left him. And Ahmad bin Hanbal, he says, what a beautiful statement he makes. He says, Wallahi al-Azim, I don't want that on the Day of Judgment, somebody else gets punished because of me. So I forgave him. I don't want nobody to get punished on the Day of Judgment because of me. So I forgave him. His son comes to him and he says, every person would come to Ahmad bin Hanbal and ask him for forgiveness. He says, I forgive you, I forgive you. His son Saleh asks him, he says, oh my father, how about those people who died before asking you for forgiveness? And he said, I forgive all of them. And then he mentions this beautiful hadith, and I will conclude with this. He says, why did you forgive all of them? He says, it comes in the Quran, فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And he says, I heard from somebody who heard from Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, quoting a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. He says that on the Day of Judgment, كُلُّ أُمَّةٍ تُدْعَى إِلَى كِتَابِهِ وَتَرَى كُلَّ أُمَّةٍ جَاثِيَةٍ. Every person will be on his knees, kneeling in front of Allah, and Allah will be giving him the book of deeds like this. He says, everybody on that day will be on their knees, إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ أَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Except for that person, the Quran ayat means the one who forgives and reconciles. فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ, meaning Allah owes him back a reward. The reward, Allah owes him now. So on the Day of Judgment, everybody will be on their knees. Announcement will be made, only those stand up that have some reward that is owed to them by Allah. somebody will ask, who are those people that Allah owes a reward to? Then the response will be, الَّذِي عَفَى وَأَصْلَحَ, the one who forgave and reconciled. The one who forgave and reconciled.